Now I know only 10% of the people, and that's a good thing. The fact that so many people are coming on board. But for the newcomers, let me say a couple of things. Firstly, there sometimes seems to be a notion that we know what adaptation is, that we know we want to do it, and that we should just hire an expert to come and tell us what to do. First of all, we don't. Second of all, there is no expert. I'm not an expert. And thirdly, we're going to have to figure it out ourselves. So we're at the stage now not of having answers, but of refining our questions. And today, to me, the synthesis across all these 6 themes was that we're starting to ask the right questions. We are all grappling with the same questions, and we're refining the questions, making them more sharper, so that we can then address the answers and come up with answers. And as we come up with even partial answers, we need to find ways to share them. So the adaptation science and knowledge and activities paradigm, if you like, is at a very nascent stage. We are just beginning what is going to be a very long journey. And the analogy I would draw is to make a parallel with the way we learn anything in our lives, those of us who have been to university and had a university education. I would say adaptation science and knowledge and practice and policy is at the nursery stage of schooling. We have to go to the kindergarten, then primary, then secondary, then college, then university, undergraduate, postgraduate, and that's the lifestyle, that's the lifespan, the length. The next 2 decades is the mountain that we have to climb in learning. So we shouldn't assume we've already reached the PhD stage or the master's stage. We are at a very, very early level. And we're all, playing in a nursery with lots of things. We're learning a little bit of ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, and we're playing at the same time. There's some chaos in that. But we have to learn out of that chaos, and we all have to work together. And the knowledge that we're going to be generating is not going to be generated from one particular sector. It's not come from the researchers or the academics alone. They have a very important role to play, but it's going to be from this collaborative nature of determining what the new living under climate change paradigm is going to be. And we need to all work together to do that. And so we are, in a sense, building a very new model of developing knowledge where we will include people who are not traditionally included in them, not just academics, not just researchers, but practitioners on the ground, even the most indigenous and most vulnerable communities who actually have one of the greatest strengths. They have the resilience, they have the experience of dealing with these problems. We need to bring them to the table and their knowledge into it. And a whole variety of other practitioners and actors as well. And how do we capture that knowledge and experience is going to be one of the challenges of adaptation science. So let me end by saying that one of the other features of adaptation as an area of knowledge generation and sharing, as it has evolved over time, unlike mitigation, which is the other climate change response strategy, which has a longer time history and a longer period of research and practice, is that unlike mitigation, where a lot of the solutions to our problems of greenhouse gas emissions in terms of reducing them or moving away from fossil fuel energy sources to cleaner energy sources tend to be associated with hardware technologies, hard technologies that are generally researched, developed in rich countries, and then disseminated and transferred to developing countries. So the paradigm is very much a north to south technology transfer paradigm. Adaptation is not going to work like that. Adaptation is too site-specific, too context-specific for a north to south paradigm to work. If there are some paradigms that work across countries, they will be primarily south to south paradigms, where countries in one coastal region can share with another coastal region, in one forest region can share with another forest region, in the south in similar socioeconomic circumstances. But I would argue even beyond that. I think with adaptation, it is also amenable, and in the future we will see, that the south can teach the north. The north, the developed countries have not yet, and as I speak from many years of working in adaptation, the developed countries have not yet understood that they will have to adapt. They're only beginning to do it, and they're only beginning now to invest in developing their own adaptive capacity. The developing countries have a head start of at least half a decade, in some cases a decade. And we can share a lot of knowledge that is being generated in the developing countries, particularly in this region in Asia. And again, I do a lot of work in other developing countries in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Asia is ahead of the game on this issue. And it's something that this forum, the people that are gathered here and others who work on this issue in the countries in Asia, both can learn from each other within Asia, but also Asia can share with other continents of Africa and Latin America, and indeed even share with the continents of North America and Europe as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Salim, for that very comprehensive synthesis and reflections. We will open the floor for 2-3 burning questions. Anyone has any question for Salim? Because it's not every day that we have Salim with Namids. Any questions from any of the topics covered this morning? Yes, you can take that. Yes, yeah. Dr. Lalaili, yes.
Yeah, and I think as Salim mentioned that we should reorganize our questions, and because there's no ready answer. But nowadays, I think there's a strong, I could say like donor-driven on the policy, or policy-driven trend. And so I feel like an assumption is if we fix the policies and then we have solutions about the adaptation. But if we think from the ground, the policymakers are just ordinary individuals like each one of us. We're facing the challenge that nobody, that's why it is called challenge. So what is the, what are the specific steps we are really we should take? Because I think even if we talk about policies are influenced, one, by scientific knowledge, which helps setting agenda, and secondly, by a lot of policy research institute, of which I'm working with. And then I think then it's bottom-up approach. Policy is driven by a lot of best practices and experiences happening on the ground. So how do we drive that, facilitate those best practices? And I think that's probably what we need to do. But today, I think lots of, we emphasize a lot on policy. I don't see the link between, to fill in this challenge. So maybe, I think Salim has lots of experience in this. Maybe you could have some answers to that. I
don't have answers, Lalaili, but I'm willing to share some thoughts. I think the issue of climate change is really, you know, we heard this in the opening remarks this morning, the defining issue of our age. It's going to be something we're all going to have to deal with. So there's no quick answers, number one. Number two, there's a role for practically every actor in dealing with it. Every one of us is going to be affected in some way, whether we are rich or poor, live in a rich country or in a poor country. Sooner or later, it's going to affect all of us. It'll affect the poor first, and the rich, those of us in this room, count as rich later. But it'll affect all of us. And all of us, therefore, have an obligation to learn about the problem, try to figure out ways in which we, whoever we are, whether an individual or working in an NGO or in a research institute or a policymaker or a funder, what our role needs to be in that. And you quite rightly point out as policymakers having a crucial role to play, and information and knowledge having a role to influence policymaking. I think that that's one of the distinguishing features of the climate change adaptation agenda versus the development agenda. This is a very fuzzy line, and people very often quite rightly ask the question, so what's different about adaptation to climate change from just good development? And I would argue that one of the differences which will emerge is that for doing climate change adaptation well, we will have to ground ourselves in science a lot more than we do with just business as usual development. We need to update that science. It's not as if you get a model and then you apply that and that's done. It's a continuous iterative process in which the scientists are going to have to play a more important role in informing policymakers as the science improves day by day, month by month, year by year. And that's not something that policymakers in general in the past have tended to do with their normal development activities. So that's one dimension, if you like, in which adaptation activities in the future will distinguish themselves from the usual business as usual development pathway that we've been undertaking. I hope that answers some of your questions.
Yes.
Thank you, Salim, for a very comprehensive summary and your insightful thoughts always. I know we are right now struggling to define how do we engage with private sector. But I'm sure private sector is very much aware that engaging with poor to build their adaptive capacity means less loss to during disasters, more money in their pocket, more buying capacity, more markets. It's not a new thing. They understand it very well. The second thing is, I think, which is also a responsibility on our part, to keep watching that no private sector initiatives erode the development or erode the adaptive capacity of people. And I think that's where we need to educate the private sector and be very, very cautious that no such development programs occur. It's not only for private sector, it's also for the government. Thank you.
Well, I agree. There's nothing, much that I would add, except to say, in the sense that there are two things that one needs to be keeping in mind with respect to thinking about adaptation to climate change as a, if you like, an additional source of information that needs to be put into the mix in terms of decision making. One of the first things that arises is not so much that you need to be adapting, but you find that a lot of things that you're doing right now are maladaptive. You're actually doing the wrong things. You're not even doing, not only not doing the right things, you're doing the wrong things. So the first thing is stop digging a hole. We're in a big hole. So stop digging is the first thing, and then try to fill the hole and get out of it is the second thing.
Yes, I see two hands, yeah. We'll take, yes, Atik bhai, yes, Atik.
That's right. On the whole question of funding, at one level this sort of disables us that there is no money on the table. On the other level, the poor across the world are already funding themselves against climate change and doing adaptation. If we approximate that costing, it will be 10 times bigger than whatever the governments are promising, if not many more times. And poor are not waiting either for scientists or for policymakers or for governments to come and help them out from their increasing stress that is coming from various aspects of climate change. So, of course we need the funding. Of course we need mainstreaming. But things are happening. I think it's up to scientists to do both that, top-down modeling, but much more going to these communities, learning from them how things are happening, and cutting across whether it's south-south or south-north. And I think time has come for North to be a bit more humble and start learning a few things about adaptation. So there is a lot of learning, lot of exchange that is bound to happen. The question is, do we resist it, or do we willingly learn from what is already happening and take it further? And earlier we can learn, earlier we can redefine our questions, as you put it, I think we'll be far ahead in solving the problem as a whole. Once we can get to that mindset that some of this problem can be solved, we will be far more, it will be far more psychologically easier to accept it. But let me make one point more rigidly, is the higher amount of mitigation, the higher amount of emission means much higher amount, not linear, but much higher amount of adaptation that will be required. So the principal emphasis still remains on mitigation, and mitigation by individuals, countries, communities, governments, whoever is emitting the most. And that has to, particularly per capita most, that has to be the simultaneous action that we must not forget.